What if that voice in your head telling you to, quit your stressful job, sell all your belongings, and just move to a cabin in the woods isn't actually seeking peace at all?
Right. What if it's just hiding?
Exactly. What if that voice is literally just terrified of failure? Today, we're doing a deep dive into the anatomy of burnout. We're looking at how the internal wars we fight every single day they're secretly draining all of our drive.
It's a profoundly human experience, honestly. That feeling of being completely split down the middle. One part of you wants to conquer the world, and the other part just wants to hide from it under a blanket.
Yeah, and the cost of that internal war is massive. I mean, when those two sides are fighting for the steering wheel, your motivation essentially just vanishes. You feel totally lost.
Which brings us to the mission of our deep dive today. We are exploring how to actually resolve those deep internal conflicts, how to reignite your drive when it feels like your fire is completely, totally out.
And we have an incredible source for this. It's a transcript of a live, deeply personal intervention conducted by Tony Robbins. The title is Do This When You Feel Lost in Life.
And we should clarify right up front, we aren't framing this as like a standard self-help lecture.
Oh, definitely not.
The source material reads much more like a real-time psychological detective story.
Yeah.
We're watching a master try to uncover exactly what happens when our internal identities go to war.
And more importantly, how to negotiate a lasting peace treaty between them. It is wild to read. So let's just set the scene here.
Sure.
The subject of this intervention is a man named Josh, and he's from Utah. And he's in a really bad place.
Yeah, he describes himself as heartbroken, frustrated, defeated.
And the word that really jumped off the page for me was small. He feels small. He explicitly tells Tony that his fire is out.
Which is a striking way to describe yourself when you look at Josh's actual track record. I mean, this is not a man who has lived a small, sheltered life by any means.
No, not at all. He's a guy who has consistently swung for the fences. The facts of his backstory are just incredible.
They really are.
He grew up in rural Michigan, right, with an alcoholic father. He essentially had to claw his way up from absolutely nothing.
Yeah, he worked as a dishwasher in restaurants for 8 years, just grinding, just to put himself and his wife through college.
Right, and he gets a teaching degree, but then he realizes his teaching skills translate perfectly to sales, so he transitions into that, does incredibly well for himself.
And then comes the big pivot. He reads the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and pivots again to become a tech entrepreneur.
Which is a massive leap, and he actually does it. He eventually builds 4 different tech companies.
He had massive success, too. Out of those 4 companies, 2 were massive wins. But, and this is crucial, the other 2 were great failures.
Yeah, the failure.
And it's those 2 recent failures that brought him to this crisis point.
Yeah.
That's why he's sitting in front of Tony Robbins feeling entirely defeated.
Okay, let's unpack this because this is the part that really made me pause. Josh is a self-made tech founder. He has built multiple companies from scratch.
He knows how to work.
Right. He clearly knows how to grind. If we think about this logically, it's like a mountain climber scaling Everest, getting, 500 feet from the summit, maybe slipping a little bit, and suddenly deciding, you know what? I'm not a climber at all.
I'm going to go live at sea level.
Exactly. I've never been a climber. I should just go live at sea level. How does someone with that much proven, battle-tested resilience suddenly feel so completely small?
It really comes down to where we place our identity, and specifically the danger of fusing our self-worth with our output.
Oh, yeah. That's dangerous.
Tony points out a very specific psychological trap that Josh fell into.
Yeah.
There's a principle he mentions, disappointment breeds uncertainty.
Right.
When Josh had those big early successes, he attached them entirely to his core identity. He became, in his own mind, Josh, the successful tech founder.
So the success was literally who he was.
Exactly. So when the next 2 companies failed, it wasn't just a business loss. It was an identity loss. He attached the failure of a corporate entity to who he was as a human being.
I see. If the business fails and you are the business, then, you are a failure. There's no separation there.
That is the exact trap.
Yeah.
And when your core identity is threatened with annihilation like that, the human mind does remarkable things to protect itself.
It definitely does.
In Josh's case, it protected him by literally fracturing his identity in 2. He tells Tony that he feels like he has 2 completely different souls constantly fighting inside of him.
The two souls, this is where the detective story gets really good because Josh actually names them, right?
Yeah, he is the hippie and the entrepreneur.
Right. And Tony actually asks to speak to them individually. It's fascinating. He has Josh physically stand in different spots on the stage to embody these different personas. It's an intense thing to visualize.
Let's look at the first persona, the hippie, or
Mhm.
what Tony later refers to as the lover archetype. When Josh embodies the hippie, his entire worldview shifts. Suddenly, he values family, togetherness, and nature above all else.
The hippie literally says they don't need wealth. He says they would be perfectly happy, quote, living in a trailer in a desert.
Which is quite a shift from a tech CEO.
Huge shift. And he points out that Josh's wife already thrifts, She doesn't care about money. She'd be happy anywhere.
Right. And Tony asks about the Chinese elements driving this persona.
Mhm.
The hippie operates on the element of earth, with maybe a little bit of water.
So it's very grounded, very flowing, very peaceful.
It sounds serene, almost enlightened. But then Tony asks to speak to the other soul.
The entrepreneur or the warrior. And this guy is a completely different animal. He is driven. He wants to build, to create, to win at the highest possible level.
He's the one who built the companies.
Exactly. The entrepreneur points out that tech entrepreneurship is the most valuable skill in the world and that tech founders are the richest people on the planet.
And his element is different, right?
Totally. He operates purely on the Chinese element of wood. So it's all about aggressive growth, expansion, and just pushing relentlessly forward.
So you have the earth and water trying to stay grounded and peaceful, and the wood trying to aggressively grow and conquer.
Wait, I'm struggling with this, though.
What do you mean?
Well, when I was reading this part of the transcript, I kept thinking, is the hippie actually just this noble pursuit of peace? Or is it a highly sophisticated defense mechanism?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Right. Think about it for a second. Have you ever, say, bombed a major presentation at work or lost a big client and suddenly found yourself browsing real estate listings for an alpaca farm in Vermont?
I mean, yes, we've all been there.
You start convincing yourself, I don't even care about the corporate ladder. I just want to make artisanal cheese.
Right, the sudden desire for a simple life.
Exactly. It feels incredibly convenient that the exact moment Josh experiences devastating financial failure, suddenly this hippie persona steps up to the mic and says, hey man, money is a construct. Let's go live in a trailer.
What's fascinating here is that Tony catches exactly that dynamic. Tony observes that the hippie didn't show up out of a sudden surge of spiritual enlightenment.
It didn't.
No, it showed up essentially to give Josh a way out. By suddenly deciding that ambition and wealth don't matter, Josh doesn't have to face his terrifying, paralyzing fear of trying to build a fifth company and discovering that maybe he actually isn't enough.
Oh, wow. So it's self-sabotage disguised as a moral high ground.
Yes, but Tony doesn't frame it maliciously, which is the genius of the intervention here. He points out to Josh that these two souls aren't actually enemies.
They aren't.
No, the hippie is desperately trying to protect Josh from the excruciating psychological pain of another failure. It's trying to prevent another identity crisis.
Right. And meanwhile, the entrepreneur is trying to fulfill a genuine calling to serve, to build, and to create something larger than himself.
Exactly. They both have positive intent. They're just expressing it in ways that are completely incompatible, which is tearing him apart.
And to illustrate the danger of this, Tony uses a really visceral physical analogy in the transcript.
The hand-pushing analogy, right?
Yeah. He talks about what happens when two parts of you push against each other with all their weight. He says, imagine pressing your hands together as hard as you possibly can.
You use a lot of energy.
A massive amount of energy. But you aren't moving anywhere. You're just trembling. And if you keep pushing against yourself like that, eventually someone slips.
And when they slip, you fall hard.
You fall hard. That internal division, that constant exhausting friction, that is what is actually dimming Josh's fire. It's not that he forgot how to build a company.
Right.
It's that he's spending 90% of his daily energy just fighting himself.
To really drive this point home, Tony shares a remarkably vulnerable story from his own life.
Mhm.
He had his own massive internal division regarding wealth and identity.
Yes, the camel racing story. This blew my mind.
It's quite a story.
Tony talks about his own trajectory. He grew up with absolutely no money for food, deeply impoverished. And then through his work, he hits this point where he is suddenly making $100,000 a month.
Which is a staggering amount of money, especially coming from nothing.
He's ecstatic. So he calls up his oldest friends from his poorer days and says, hey, I've got money now. let's all fly to Egypt and race camels between the pyramids.
Which is quite the invitation. But you can see how it might not land well with people who are still struggling to pay rent.
Exactly. His friends don't react with excitement at all. They react with deep jealousy, resentment, and anger. They essentially reject him for having that kind of wealth.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. And Tony says that in that moment, his own internal lover or hippie side completely panicked. It saw wealth as the exact thing that was isolating him from his tribe, from love, and from connection.
So we have to ask, what does the mind do when it feels that social survival is threatened?
It destroys the threat.
It sabotages the threat, yes. Tony explains that his brain essentially decided to completely get rid of the money.
Wow.
He lost it all. He moved into a tiny 400-square-foot bachelor pad and started using food as a drug to cope.
That is wild.
All because his internal evolutionary desire for tribal connection was at absolute war with his internal ability to generate wealth.
It's the exact same dynamic Josh is facing then.
Exactly.
So you have these two fundamentally opposed drives inside one person. How do you actually negotiate a ceasefire when two sides absolutely refuse to compromise? Because compromise usually just feels like losing, you know?
Right. And Tony's entire philosophy here hinges on finding alignment rather than forced compromise.
Alignment.
And the anecdote he uses to explain this is incredibly powerful. He brings up an experience he had being on a CNN panel right after the tragic shooting at Sandy Hook.
Oh, man. And as you can imagine, that panel was incredibly heated. You had people on both sides of the aisle engaging in a furious, angry debate about gun control. The tension is just through the roof.
Obviously.
But instead of jumping into the political fight, Tony actually stops the conversation. He points out that everyone in that room, despite their intense anger at each other, actually has total alignment on the core issue.
They do.
Yeah. Both sides want the exact same thing. They want children to be safe and protected. They simply have wildly different, completely opposed beliefs on the methodology of how to achieve that safety.
And we should note carefully here, for everyone listening, Tony is not endorsing either policy side in the source material.
Oh, absolutely not.
He is making a political statement at all. He is using this purely as a masterclass in conflict resolution. The psychological lesson is profound. If you focus entirely on the fighting, the different methods and the policies, you get absolutely nowhere.
You're just pushing your hands together.
Exactly. But if you focus on the alignment, the shared ultimate goal of child safety, you can actually start communicating.
So he's telling Josh, you have to do the exact same thing with your two souls. The hippie and the entrepreneur actually want the exact same thing. They both want Josh to be fulfilled, happy, and safe.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Tony argues that as long as Josh is just focused on serving his own ego, he's going to stay hopelessly divided.
Serving his ego, meaning just trying to win to prove he's a winner.
Right. Trying to win just to avoid feeling small. But Tony argues that if you elevate your calling, if you aim to serve mass numbers of people rather than just yourself, the universe, or life, supports you with greater insights.
Service is the key.
Yes. The entrepreneur isn't just building tech to buy a bigger house. He has a calling to serve millions of users. And the hippie, who loves connection and humanity, can absolutely get behind a massive mission of service. Service is the bridge between the two.
Service is the bridge. But, understanding that intellectually is one thing. You can nod along to that concept all day.
Sure, it makes logical sense.
Right. But Tony knows Josh has to actually feel this integration in his nervous system, not just in his logical brain. And this leads to what is honestly the strangest, but easily the most compelling part of the entire transcript.
The visualization exercise.
Yes. Tony walks Josh through this intensely specific physical visualization to literally rewire his nervous system right there on the stage.
He asks Josh to hold out his hands, palms up. He tells him to place the entrepreneur persona in his right hand and the hippie persona in his left hand.
And then rather than having them talk to each other, which is what you'd expect, he has Josh assign physical attributes to them.
Colors, shapes, textures, and sounds.
Let's break down these visuals because they are incredibly distinct. In the right hand, we have the entrepreneur. Josh visualizes this persona as a red circle.
A red circle.
Yeah. It's one-dimensional, it's smooth. The sound it makes is a sharp, aggressive yes, and its core message is simply win. And importantly, Josh feels this persona residing deep in his gut.
It's very primal, very driven by base instinct.
Exactly.
Now contrast that entirely with the left hand, the hippie. Josh visualizes this persona as a white triangle. It has a soft, almost plush texture.
So totally different from the smooth circle.
Completely. And the sound it makes isn't a shout. It's a quiet sense of awe. Wow. Its core message is keep going. And this persona resides squarely in Josh's heart.
So what does this all mean? Why is Tony Robbins, this world-famous strategist, standing on a stage in front of thousands of people having a grown man play with imaginary red circles and soft white triangles in his hands?
It sounds completely absurd until Tony explains the mechanism behind it. He says he is intentionally bypassing Josh's conscious mind.
Bypassing it entirely.
Yes, this is a recognized psychological technique. It's often referred to as cognitive diffusion. The conscious mind is where the ego lives.
Oh.
It's where the fear of failure, the arguments, and the intellectual defenses all live. If Tony just tries to talk Josh into feeling better, Josh's intellect will fight him every step of the way.
Oh, I see. So if we think about it like a computer system, the conscious mind is like really buggy software.
Exactly.
It's full of glitches and error messages about why Josh can't build another company, but Tony is trying to access the hardware, the autonomic nervous system.
Yes, the superconscious.
He describes this other than conscious mind as the exact same system that beats your heart 100,000 times a day without you ever having to think about it. It's the part of you that just knows how to heal a cut on your finger.
Precisely. By forcing Josh to assign physical shapes and colors to his emotions, Tony is taking an abstract, overwhelming feeling of failure and turning it into a tangible object.
A shape you can hold.
Right. The amygdala, the fear center of the brain, stops seeing the emotion as a mortal threat to his identity and starts seeing it as a physical puzzle to solve.
That makes so much sense. It gives the nervous system a way to process the conflict without triggering all the intellectual baggage.
And then because the actual merge.
Yes. Tony has Josh slowly bring his hands together in front of him. He instructs him to visualize pouring the soft white light of the hippie into the sharp red light of the entrepreneur and vice versa.
He has him literally mash the soft white triangle and the smooth red circle together.
And what they create in Josh's mind isn't a muddy, compromised mess. Josh describes the transformation vividly. He says it morphs into a unified, three-dimensional white and red sphere of fire.
It's not one or the other anymore. It's both of them.
Integrated into something entirely new and, honestly, far more powerful.
It's such an incredible image. Love and courage fused together into a sphere of fire.
But Tony knows that old habits die hard, right? And to make sure this peace treaty actually lasts in the real world, he does something brilliant. He brings humor into it.
Yes, he asks the two newly merged personas to give each other nicknames.
Right, so that when they inevitably start to drift back into their old argumentative patterns, they don't go to war, they just playfully check each other.
That's great pattern interrupt. The entrepreneur, the hardcore tech founder, agrees to call the hippie Jerry, Jer, or JG.
Like Jerry Garcia.
Exactly, he names him after Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead. Tony even tells him to picture Jerry Garcia ice cream to keep the association light, warm, and slightly ridiculous.
And the hippie obviously needs a name for the entrepreneur, for when the entrepreneur starts acting a bit too aggressive or, like a dictator. So the hippie decides to call the entrepreneur Maestro.
Maestro. I love that.
It's respectful because it acknowledges his ability to orchestrate and build massive things, but it's a gentle, slightly sarcastic reminder not to take himself so incredibly seriously all the time.
The resolution of the intervention is really quite moving, especially when you understand the mechanics of what they've just done with the nervous system.
It really is.
Tony asks Maestro, the gut-driven entrepreneur, if he would be willing to move his primary residence within Josh's body. He asks him to move up from the gut into the heart to live permanently alongside Jerry, the hippie.
Maestro agrees. He says he'll move into the heart as long as he can keep his original place in the gut, like keeping a bachelor pad for when he needs to get aggressive work done.
Which gets a big laugh from the crowd.
It does. But then Josh actually closes his eyes and visualizes the entrepreneur entering the heart space. He takes a deep breath and says it feels like home. And the two personas embrace.
Jerry tells Maestro, I've missed you, man.
And Maestro replies, I love you. I always have.
It's the ultimate realization for Josh. Tony declares to him right then that his fire was never actually lost and it was never put out.
It was just trapped.
Exactly. It was trapped under the crushing weight of this massive internal division. It was waiting in the heart the entire time, waiting for these two sides of his identity to stop fighting for control and unify.
It honestly gives you chills when you read it. So, for everyone listening to this right now, what are our big
Yeah.
takeaways here? First and foremost, that feeling you have of a lost fire or total crushing burnout.
It is very often an illusion.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is a smokescreen created by fear and intense internal division.
When you attach your core identity to external things, like the
Mhm.
success or failure of a business or a relationship or a project, you force your mind to create defensive personas to protect you from the pain of loss.
Because losing that thing means losing yourself.
Right. You inevitably create a warrior who feels he must win at all costs to survive, and a lover who wants to run away and hide to avoid the pain of losing.
But when you realize through cognitive diffusion or just deep self-reflection that both of those personas actually want the exact same thing, they want your ultimate safety and well-being, they can stop acting like mortal enemies and start acting like brothers.
And when the warrior and the lover sit at the same table and merge their goals, your drive doesn't just return, it returns infinitely stronger.
Because it's fueled by a mission of service rather than just the fragile human ego.
It is a complete paradigm shift. You move from fighting your perceived weaknesses to integrating them into your overall strength.
Which brings us to our final thought for today's deep dive. I want you, the listener, to think about the absolute biggest internal conflict you are currently battling in your own life right now.
You know, the one we're talking about.
Yeah, that voice in your head that you constantly argue with, the one you consider your biggest flaw, your greatest weakness, or your biggest obstacle to success. What if that voice isn't an enemy at all?
What if it's just a fiercely protective brother?
Exactly. Wearing a really weird disguise, just waiting to be invited into your heart and given a seat at the steering wheel.
It's a question that completely changes the landscape of how we view our own minds.
It really does. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. We'll catch you next time.